Yeah, g'day YouTubers, Spanner Man again here. We're just going to talk about this Stihl Raker gauge. This is called a constant Raker gauge. Someone was asking me about all the markings on the side, so I'll just go over those. But the first marking is the one here. It's at the front there, and when placed on top of 4 teeth, you get an average height. It sits on 4 teeth, so it mightn't sit perfect. One tooth could be slightly higher than the other, but it comes close enough that it will measure 0.65 of a millimeter, meaning that if it protrudes through this slot and you file it, it would have meant that the raker depth is 0.65 of a millimeter below the highest point of the tooth. So that's the way it works. It's called a constant depth gauge because it will only ever take 0.65 of a millimeter off the raker for the life of the tooth. Even when you get towards the end of the life, it's still only removing 0.65 of a millimeter, which really isn't enough. But nonetheless, this is a type of gauge that's out there. You really need to be taking about 1.2 millimeters of raker off by the time you get to the witness mark end of life. So these type of gauges are available in 3 sizes. You've got 0.45 of a millimeter, which is for your 1/4 inch picot chain. You've got the 0.65 millimeter, which is for the 1/4 inch, the 3/8, 0.325 and 3/8 picot or low profile. Then you've got the 404, which is 0.85 of a millimeter. So that's the 3 different sizes there, and you'll see various windows there. You've got 30 degrees here left and 30 degrees right, 10 degrees left, 10 degrees right, and 2 windows of the 35 degrees left and right, and a 0 degree. Don't know why you got 0 degree, but nonetheless you have. At the other end here, you've got a little millimeter ruler, which you can measure the depth of your bar, and this is a little cleaning tool as well. Now, when you flip it over to the side, you'll notice that there's some markings there, and you'll notice that this edge here is 85 degrees. Then the next one is 75 degrees. You'll notice that that's 75 degrees there on the left, and on the right it's 60 degrees. Then you'll notice that there's a 90 degree here on the left, and on the right there's an 80 degree. Now all these are for your side plate of your tooth, and in most cases, you probably won't use it unless you're square filing or unless you're doing a hexacut. For those that are not too sure, you've got X-cut and hexacut for Husqvarna, and it looks a little bit like that. So, you know, it's used to measure the side plate when it's at a specific straight angle. You can't measure when you've got a C shape like this. This can't be measured because you're changing from 60 degrees all the way through this shape here. It keeps changing as we move down. But on a square cut chain, you could be 85 degrees, you could be 80 degrees, and some even do 90 degrees. So the whole idea is that you can put this up against the side of your chain and you can measure that angle or get a pretty good approximate idea that it is within the specification as what it should be. So that's what they're for. So that's virtually it for this type of gauge. As I said, it does fit 1/4 inch, 3/8, 0.325 and 3/8 picot, and you've got your other 2 sizes, which is for your 1/4 inch micro or picot, and that's 0.45 of a millimeter, and for your 404 chain that's 0.85. So that is a constant gauge. That's all it does. The next type of gauge in the Stihl range is a progressive depth gauge, which is a totally different design. Now, mind you, this particular design here was invented by Joseph Burford Cox in Portland, Oregon, but it never had no windows. It was a bit of metal that looked similar to this, and it had a little slot at each end, and you would take 25 thou at one end, which is 0.65 of a millimetre, and 30 thou at the other end, which is 0.85, I think, of a millimetre, roughly, or 0.75. It's one or the other. I can't just remember. But that was the gauge that he had, and he put a worldwide patent on it about in the early 50s. A man by the name of Ray Carlton invented the progressive depth gauge in the early 60s and put a worldwide patent on that. Now, the progressive depth gauge works totally different. Rather than sit on 4 individual tooth, it sits on 1 individual tooth. It has a hard setting and a soft setting. It's called a progressive depth gauge because in the beginning, it will remove 0.65 of a millimetre, but during the life of the tooth as it wears down, as I said earlier before, it will allow you to remove 1.2 millimetres of tooth, because one thing that a tooth does when it cuts through a log, it has this rocking motion, and it rocks up and down like that. So this, as this part here, the tooth, touches the timber and strikes the timber, it causes the tooth to come down, but the raker stops it taking any more of a bite in the timber, so it has this rocking motion and it takes little tiny chips out. So the other thing that happens that when you file the tooth down, this gap between here and here gets a lot larger, and the rocking motion is affected, and that's why you need to take 1.2 millimetres of depth off the raker from being brand new at 0.65 to 1.2 millimetres by the time you get to the end of the life. Look, I hope that's just a bit of a brief explanation on how the raker gauges work, the two from Stihl. Also, these are hardened to 62 Rockwell, same as this one here. So they are hardened. You can run the file over the top, as you can see. All it does is put very fine scratches on there. You won't file the gauge away. Look, thanks for watching. Give us a thumbs up. Bye for now.